Welcome to the video, everyone. John Bodine here with Redemptive Psych. In this video, we're going to introduce typing and how to type others and ourselves through the vectors, not through the test. We have the other series going on how you can use the test and some other factors to help get a more accurate result. This is different. This is how to type people through their communication, through how they interact, etc., etc. Now, the traits here are mainly visible externally. You have to discern based on how someone talks, based on how you talk, how they communicate, and the energy of how they interact with others and the world around them to discern what that means and where that comes from. And these come from these traits. So this video is not going to be an exhaustive list of the traits. I've picked what I feel are the most important ones, particularly for an introduction, and these ones will get you overall the most bang for your buck, so to speak. So with these traits, with just even these three traits, the red, blue, and green, if you can find the answer to those three for a type, you can get down to 2 types every time, I believe. So the typing vectors visible here are from these 2 people. David Keirsey started with the temperaments and talked about some of these attributes as related to the different temperaments. But mainly, this is Linda Berens' work. She has pioneered pretty incredible patterns here that if you can even just become a journeyman with them, be aware of them, learn how they're used a little bit, it can totally change how you're going to look at other people and be able to increase your discernment of which type a person may or may not be. Now, it's very, very important here that when we go over these traits, you see an either or. Either you initiate or you respond. Those are at the extremes, as Linda Berens points out in the book, and as you will see when you start using these are a spectrum. What does that mean? This means that someone who prefers to respond, someone who likes when other people come to them, they still initiate at least some of the time. And of some of the responding types, there are a few of them that are more comfortable with initiating than others. So it's very important to keep in mind that this is a spectrum. And if you put all the 16 types on this spectrum, not all the extroverts are going to be at the very end here. Some of them will be dotted along. And there's that element of it, of different extroverts and different types, but also your nurture and what you've been through affecting your relationship with how you communicate. If you were raised with parents who preferred a more informative style and not being told what to do, direct types come across that way. If you are a direct type and were raised in that environment, for example, you had to adjust some of the way you communicated, that even though it wasn't as natural to you, it still became a way you learned to express yourself. So this is a spectrum. These are dynamic traits, meaning that we can identify a preference, but everyone uses both the traits. It's just, what is your preference? What is your go-to? And if you can discern that, then you can see what type of person may be. Starting with initiating or responding. Does someone prefer to initiate, to go to another person, to start something, to take the initiation of the communication? Or do they prefer to wait for someone else to initiate towards them and then respond? If you watch someone in interactions, people who begin new topics or assert themselves more comfortably, more likely to be initiating. You have to keep in mind different environments, though. If you're around people who you're very comfortable with, you can fluidly move between these traits. This is where introverts talk about, when I'm around people I like, I'm more extroverted. That is true in a behavior sense because you're not being very cautious, you don't feel threatened, you're comfortable saying what comes to mind. But in general, when applied to different contexts, what do you prefer more? What do you prefer more? And looking at other people, do they tend to start the conversation? Do they tend to take charge of the conversation? Or do they tend to wait and then respond and then share their thoughts after someone else comes to them? So if a person is more on the initiating side, they are in line with extroverted traits. If they're more on the responding side, they're more aligned with introverted traits. Now keep in mind also something like a job where an introvert has to be a teacher and they have to talk a lot and share a lot. That can be something that may skew what that looks like. But taken in a more natural environment, you can gather some better information and decide which of these traits they better relate to. So here you can decide whether someone is an extrovert or an introvert. Next, we have abstract or concrete. More conceptual or more in reality. More open to ideas, more open to what is. Again, a spectrum, but people who are more open to ideas, are more conceptual, talk in terms of concepts, talk in terms of the what if, talk more in terms of what's possible. The concrete types talk more about what is or what has been, or communicating their day-to-day personal experience. So again, there are some intuitive types who are a little more focused on the specifics and the goal and what's going on, just as there are a few more concrete types who are more open to some ideas. But if you can pick up on what is their go-to communication style, are they talking about what if, or are they talking about what is? That there, the binary, will help you decide whether someone's an intuitive type, meaning they have an intuition function in one of their top 2 slots, or if they're a sensing type, a concrete type, if they have a sensing function in one of their top 2 slots. These last two, direct or informative and outcome versus process, are a little more complex. They're a little harder to discern, particularly because types who learn to behave a little differently can mask these traits a little better. However, these traits are still evident once you can cut through some of the nurture elements or environmental elements as well. So direct versus informative. This is communication. This is how people speak. Direct types get to the point. They don't mince words as much. They only share as much as they feel is necessary and not so much more. Informative types, in a negative sense, think of it as like passive aggression, but it's not just that. It's providing information, it's providing context. It's giving options of how the other person might react or respond to that information. So an informative type will say more than is necessary. They may share 5 or 6 things that are not necessarily fully relevant, and then after the direct type picks 1 or 2 of those things to respond to, then the informative type supplies more information in that context. So if you can figure out if they're direct, for example, if they're more to the point, they look perhaps a little more bossy in how they communicate, particularly an extrovert who's direct. If they are direct, they are going to be one of the NJ types, one of the 4 NJs, the INFJ, the ENFJ, the INTJ, or the ENTJ, or one of the ST types. These are the STPs, ESTP, ISTP, or the ESTJ and ISTJ, the STJs. So those 8 types are direct. The 8 types that are informative, that are more about supplying information and not necessarily being straight to the point. This is the NPs, the NFPs, ENFP, INFP, and then the NTPs, the INTP and ENTP. And also the SF types, these are the SFJs and the SFPs. So those 8 types are more informative. These 8 types, the NJs and STs, are more direct. Like I said, if you get through these first 3 vectors and you have a sense of clarity about each one, you can get very, very close to a type. So let's say that they are initiating, they're an extrovert, okay? That eliminates half the types. You only have 8 left. You only have the extroverts. And you find that they're more concrete. They're talking about their experience or what's going on around them. They are an extrovert who has a sensing function in one of their top 2 slots. And then you realize they are pretty direct. They are to the point. They come across perhaps a little bossy, very focused. That means because they're concrete, they cannot be an NJ. Because they're extrovert, they have to be an extroverted ST type, meaning that they either have to be an ESTJ or an ESTP. We have it narrowed down to 2 with just these 3 vectors. It's very powerful if you can find them. Now, don't be discouraged if you can't always discern which vector is which. There are a lot of academics, for example, a lot of ESTJs who look more intuitive. So maybe that's a vector you revisit later. But again, if you can get these 3, you can narrow it down pretty quick. Let's try another one. Let's say you find that they're responding. Okay, they like to respond to someone coming to them. They communicate more comfortably after the interaction has already started. And then you find out they are an abstract type. They're more conceptual. They're more interested in possibilities. Then this type is more informative. They supply information. They are not necessarily super direct with their communication. That means because they're concrete and informative and an introvert, they have to be an SF type. Now, they can't be an NP because they're not abstract, right? So we're down to the two introverted SF types, the ISFP or the ISFJ, right? And lastly is outcome versus process. The outcome types, the 8 outcome types, are more focused on the outcome, on the end result. It's like sometimes they only have eyes for the end result. Like, well, nothing matters unless we get that end result. Process types, they care a little bit about the end result, but it's more about how we're going to get there, the process of how we're going to get there, the path, how to get there. The most extreme example of only process is that Jack Sparrow guy from Pirates of the Caribbean, where it's about the it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Process is more journey oriented, outcome is more destination oriented. Now, I've heard people attach the word planning to an outcome type, that they're all about plans. They are more about plans in general. That is true. However, this is what makes typing this vector complex. A lot of the process types, which are 8 of them, will plan too, but their plans are more adaptable. They adjust the plans on the fly. It's like they have a plan on like half a sheet of paper, whereas the outcome type will have like 15 pages of paper, and that process type with their half sheet will add information or change or cross out things as things change. So they can still have a plan, but they're still process. The most difficult type, in my opinion, to decide whether they're a process type or not is the ISTJ. With TE parent, they are plan oriented. They are steps oriented. They want the consistent result, kind of, but the way they go about it is still adaptive. Compare that to an ESTJ. They are all about plans and controlling the result. So just because someone likes plans does not mean that they have to be an outcome type. Another way of looking at it is with their tendencies, the outcome types tend to be a little controlling of, it's like creating a sterile environment. Like we're only going to focus on the result. Nothing else matters. Nothing else is welcome. That is at the extreme levels. Whereas at the extreme levels of process is chaos and like all this movement, rowing oars and kind of going in circles, and it feels like you're making progress, feels like you're moving towards it, but you're just having movement, not towards the outcome. Now, there's a couple types specifically that are challenging. I mentioned the ISTJ. The ESTP is another one because they are an outcome type. But with extroverted sensing hero, they are also adaptable as a person. They can react to the situation, but they are still more focused on the outcome. So again, there is a natural spectrum here of, personally, I would put an ESTP closer to the middle, where they are still focused on the result, but they are pretty adaptive too. But if you can decide, if you can figure out if they're outcome or process, that's going to help you a lot. And in a future video, I'm going to go over this again, the outcome and process, and show you what types exactly are related to that in a different way of typing. But these 4 vectors, I believe, are among the most important to start with. And like I showed you, at least with these 3, you can arrive down to 2 types pretty quick. I also look forward to sharing a new typing video on a celebrity coming out soon. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.